I expect the other two members will show up momentarily, but we have a tight schedule today. I'll call the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the January 28th, 21 meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Passes. Thank you. Second item on the agenda is the public agenda. No one has signed up. Of course, we do have a presentation, but that's a separate agenda item. So we'll move on to the staff report, Captain.
Hey, good afternoon. Statistics for complaints received from January 13th to February 18th. We had 34 external complaints, 16 internal complaints. How that was broken down was we had 1 excessive force complaint, 21 improper conducts, 24 procedural violations, 3 safety violations, and 1 unnecessary force. Dispositions, we have 1 was cleared by Axon, 8 coaching and mentoring, 5 exonerated, 1 not sustained. 21 of those investigations are still ongoing. 2 were sustained and 12 were unfounded. Any questions?
They also circulated a complaint closed list with the summary of the nature of the complaint. Does anyone have a case they'd like to review looking at that list?
I just have a question, Captain
Yes.
Nicholson. I guess my question is, what assurance can you give the board, or how can the board know that those complaints that have been investigated, that the investigation was done in accord with WPD's policy number 901, and that, again, the complainants were contacted as it states there in the policy, and that in the letter that is sent out, an actual finding is identified?
Well, I know in my bureau, and I know department-wide, anytime that we get complaints that are internal or external that involve a civilian, we send out a finding once the supervisor that investigated the complaint. So like if someone gets some discipline, we let them know that that the officer was disciplined, or if it was unfounded, we send them a letter and let them know that that was the finding of the investigation.
Okay, but that finding is coming from your particular bureau, not necessarily PSB, right?
Yes, well, all of the complaints don't necessarily go to PSB, so A and B violations, like we had talked about last week, are handled within the bureau. Generally C's, well, I'll take it back. D's, E's, and F for the regulation. Those are handled by PSB. A's, B's, and C's are generally handled in the field. So like the rude conduct, those type of investigations, we will, the interim and blue team, we send a finding back to PSB, and then we send a letter out to the complainant and let them know how the investigation wrapped up. And it's the same. Go ahead.
I guess those are pretty much, those are both citizen and internal situations?
Well, if it's if an officer lost some evidence or something like that, it wouldn't be any civilian to contact. But if it's something that a citizen brought a complaint about, then we do send them a finding.
Okay, but so the policy states that that civilian is supposed to be contacted as part of the investigation process. And we know that that doesn't happen all the time, but it's stated that that's the policy. And so what assurance can you give the board?
Well, I know that, in my bureau, and I know as a command staff, that's something that we always talk to our officers about as far as contacting the complainant. If somebody makes a complaint, we don't just talk to the officers. We make sure that we talk to the complainant, get their side of the story. Even if they submit like a written complaint, we still have that supervisor, whoever's assigned that investigation, contact them. And then once the investigation is over, they will know one way or the other what happened with the investigation. So if there's a specific instance that you have some concern about, we can definitely review that.
But again, you're speaking for your rural. But again, my question is, how can you assure us, or how can we know as a board that that is happening across the board?
Well, that's the direction of the command staff. So we contact all complainants. So now, if there's an instance that didn't happen,
we have one very specifically. Yeah, we know that doesn't happen.
well, we try to be perfect. Sometimes we're not infallible, but we do try and correct that.
It's not about a matter of perfection, Captain. I'm not trying to be argumentative. It's just a matter of following policy. And that hasn't happened in a specific case we know of. Okay? And so I'm just asking for what assurance, or how can we know in all these complaints that have been investigated, okay? How can we know what happened in them? How can we know and have assurance that it's going to happen going forward?
Well, that is the guideline that we do follow. And like I said, if there's a specific instance that didn't happen, then we can look to address that. I know that is the way that the command staff and executive staff, we do make it a point to contact all the complainants in all of our investigations as far as.
Richard Berger.
Any other questions, comments?
Is Richard Berger here tonight?
He's sick today.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe we can have somebody from PSB come to answer that in the future.
Okay.
Any other questions, the captain? I neglected to mention the last meeting that Robert Thompson did not ask for reappointment, so he's no longer on the board. Sharon and I have both been reappointed to 4-year terms ending on December 31, 24. And I understand that the city manager is considering a couple of additional members to the board. But that's his decision, not ours, so we'll wait to hear. All right.
Jay, I have a question for you. As you know, I requested some additional statistics, and do you want to go over those now during this complaint report, or do you want new business?
Why don't we hold it for new business, because we have Walt Chappell and Sheila Officer here too, and I want to try to keep it going. One additional item to the agenda is Sharon at the last meeting asked about the CARES money, I think, and it was, who was going to address that?
Chief Ramsey.
Chief Ramsey is going to address the question you raised at the last meeting.
Can I do that right now?
Yep, you're on it.
Well, good day, everybody. The question that was brought forward about the CARES Act money, I have the dates. I just got to pull them up here real quick. Finding my eyesight is getting worse and worse for some reason. I can't figure out why. So this was, there was CARES Act money that we applied for in the spring. And at my initiative and desire, I wanted to bring in an emergency manager to help us square away policies and practices. We received the grant in May. It was approved by the council on May 19th. We had to write a job description. We didn't have an emergency manager job description. That took time. Had to go through the different levels of approval at the city. And it was posted on July 15th, and it was posted until July 30th. On August 5th, notifications were sent to the candidates clarifying some salary questions that had come up, and some candidates chose to withdraw based on the salary clarifications. On the 10th of August, there was the subject matter expert review of the applicants. And then the top candidates were chosen. Interviews were scheduled in September. A lot of this was slowed down with HR because of COVID and the demands that HR was having with people working from home and other HR issues that just came along with all the complexities of last year. And on the 24th, virtual interviews were held of 24th of September. On the 28th, background information request was sent to the top candidate. And we hadn't heard back in mid-October from that number one candidate. There was no response. We tried for another week to reach them and never heard back. We spoke to the number two candidate, who at that point had accepted another job. And based on the applications that we had received, we didn't feel that there was anybody else that was qualified. And rather than go through all this again, it's a 2-year grant, so rather than have, we already lost, I don't know how many months that is, 4 or 5 months. One of the things that had come up, and the CARES money was to help us be more effective in addressing COVID and COVID-related issues. One of the things that we discovered in the summer was we had to continue with our training, right? There's just some hands-on training and things that we do that we couldn't skip. And we had found that in one class there was some infection of COVID. And the training captain, Lem Moore, had been requesting money for software to allow virtual training so that we didn't have to pack everybody in rooms for police training. And it's a larger software system that helps us manage training and track training, which is a big issue in today's world. And so in October, when all this was kind of falling apart with the emergency manager and the clock ticking, we thought, well, let's maybe see if we can't reallocate this to that training program to help us be more effective with the variables that I just mentioned. So that's how it came about. The reason why was, if we would have had to go through another process, it probably would have been a couple more months, and again, it's just a 24-month grant period. So that is the story on the emergency manager. I personally would, we are still going to try and seek funding for a position like that. I think it would be beneficial. But with that grant, it just wasn't practical to continue to try and fill that, if that makes sense.
Well, the reason I asked was that I had people talk to me because they know I'm on this, and the concern that was expressed was that they couldn't understand how the software tied in to COVID and the fact that emergency manager was never hired. But they were concerned about how the software could be a part of the CARES money. And so that's why I asked, because I said, I only know what I read in the paper.
Sure. And it's hard to get all the points in a news story. So hopefully that's a acceptable explanation. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, the next item on the agenda, we want to keep moving because I want to allow enough time, is the racial profiling information by Mr. Chappell and Sheila Officer. So have at it, folks. Well, I think they're recording you too, so.
We can see you better too.
Okay, my name is Sheila Officer. I'm the chair of the Racial Profiling Citizens Advisory Board. Please forgive me, but I don't want to remove my mask, so hopefully you can understand me and hear me at the same time. Is that about okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. In being the chair of the Racial Profiling Citizens Advisory Board, we've been in existence since 2000. This board was started by Dr. Chappell, and we've had a lot of accomplishments since that time. In 2005, with the help of then Senator Ruby Gilbert, House Representative Gail Finney, and Senator Aletha Falsgutto, and what's his name? Donald Betts, Senator Donald Betts, excuse me. We crafted and have passed the racial profiling statute, 224606 through 11, if I'm not mistaken. Please take a look at that. But we helped craft that. We've been working on that. Our mission with this board is to work diligently with the Wichita Police Department and also with Sheriff Easter, the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Department, in eliminating bias-based policing. The way that we do that is by working with them in revising policies, visiting policies to see what needs to be changed, to see what's more effective and more user-friendly in servicing this community. Policies, training, we present workshops. Pre-COVID, our mission was to present at least 3 workshops annually. Post-COVID, we haven't been able to do as much as we would like to do in addressing the issues of this community. But in June, I believe, of 2020, we had a workshop addressing driver's license suspension. As a matter of fact, right now, that's our primary mission, is to get some type of revisions, modifications, change, and eliminations in some of the driver's license suspension laws on the state of Kansas books. Let's see here. As far as outreach is concerned, those are our workshops that I just explained about. The results of a analysis that you have before you is from 16 and 18 traffic citations that we received from the Wichita Police Department. And thank you, Chief Ramsey, for that. Dr. Chappell put in over 100 labor hours, and we weren't paid for those, 100 labor hours in analyzing all of that information and data. With the assistance of Chief Ramsey and some conversations that we had, the Wichita Police Department then wanted to do another independent evaluation of the data and information, and therefore that's how kind of Dr. Bertzer came into play at Wichita State University. Okay, I am going to let Dr. Chappell speak from this point on, because this is his baby. He put in a lot of time on that. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you, Dr. Walt Chappell.
Thank you.
Well, folks, I thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you. This is a long time coming. Your chair and I have been communicating by phone and email, and it's important we have a chance to share with each other some of the things that have been going on in the city for many years. The first thing I want to come about is to discuss the idea of accountability. That's what this board is about. You, the Citizen Review Board, are looking at ways to make sure that the officers that are on our street are doing what we ask them to do, that the awesome powers we give them as citizens to stop somebody, to arrest somebody, to put them in jail, to find them, to have a number of powers that we as citizens would never have. That's pretty important, isn't it? We have to make sure as citizens that the people that we hire and pay are actually doing what we hope they'll do without having a lot of extra drama in our lives, a lot of people put in jail that shouldn't be there, or that we have excessive use of force that is applied to us at a stop. And most of the stuff starts with a stop, doesn't it? It's important to know, okay, how do we balance this out so we have our rights and we have the opportunities for justice? Now, I put together a very short presentation. I want to make sure that each of you have it. If I don't go into all the details, I know your chairman, Mr. Fowler, has given us about 45 minutes, but there's a lot more information here than we'll be able to cover. So what we try to do is make sure that you have this in writing as well, and you can take it home and you can study it in detail. So if we miss something today and we don't answer the questions you need, please ask, but if we don't get to it, then we have phone numbers. We can talk to you in more detail later. The first document that you have is in fact the presentation itself, and I'll go through that in a few minutes. You also have then a WPD stop data analysis, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. We have accidents for the WPD by citation and by race. You have one that's entitled moving and non-moving violations. All of these came about from the data that was provided with the help of our chief and the municipal court. That was a request that took almost a year, by the way, to get fulfilled, and we thank you for finally getting the data to us. But now that we've had our chief with us since 2016, we wanted to see, all right, what kind of progress is being made under new administration, what is actually happening on the streets. So one of the first things we want to do here, if I can get this thing to work well, is the fact that we in 2018 had census data that showed we had about 63% of the population were Caucasian, like myself, several other people in this room, okay? 11% were black and approximately 17% Hispanic. Now is 2010 data. We have now with the 2020 census an update that will come out here and hopefully sometime in February or March. We're almost at the end of February, so I assume it'll be March or April before it finally gets released. Now there have been 5 studies. This is not the only one available, obviously. We started in the year 2000 with the state legislature appropriating $250,000 to look at the way in which stops are taking place across the whole state of Kansas. The Police Foundation in Washington, D.C. did that analysis. They came back with the conclusion that you're twice as likely to be stopped almost anywhere in this state if you're black. Now we had then in 2001 and 2004 what they called stop studies done by the Wichita Police Department, where every stop was recorded for 6 months. Those data came back with the same result. You're twice as likely to be stopped, given a citation if you're black in Wichita, Kansas. You're 3 times more likely to be arrested, to have a physical altercation with the police, and to also then be put in jail or searched. Now, those are things that are disproportionate, aren't they? All people should be treated the same. That's the assumption we have under our Constitution. We have equal rights under the Constitution. But if the enforcement is disproportionate, we've got a problem. Okay, then in about 2012, 2013, 2014, 3 years together aggregate, data was provided to us with the citizens, our Racial Profiling Advisory Board, which, by the way, we were serving this function with you folks. Before you were formed, the city had a memorandum of understanding with the Racial Profiling Advisory Board to do the advising that you are now doing. There's a story behind that, and I'll not go into it. But my point is that we were able to get those 3 years of data, and sure enough, what we did at that point is give it to Dr. Berger. I didn't touch it. We received it, but we gave it to Dr. Berger. He did his analysis. It took him about a year to get back. But sure enough, same conclusions. You're twice as likely to be stopped in Wichita if you're black. So we have a new chief, and in 2016, 17, and 18, we have some very exciting information to share with you. The number of citations given has actually dropped from 114,000 under Norman Williams, the chief at that point, in 2007, down to about 52,000 in 2016. The following 2 years, it dropped to 42,000 citations issued by Wichita police officers. A major reduction. If you follow what I'm saying, 117,000 down to 42,000. So the question is, all right, how are we doing in terms of proportional enforcement? And unfortunately, we found in the analysis that I did, and I'll share with you the details, again, you're twice as likely to be stopped in Wichita, Kansas if you're a police officer, if you're a black driver. Don't know why, can't say for sure, but there's obviously a pattern here, and that pattern is important for us to follow up on. Now, I'm trying to see the screen and operate this at the same time, but we can see now on the next page the data that I was just talking about. We have now the number of citations in 2017, 2018, and so forth listed. And the good point we wanted to reinforce is the fact that the number of citations dropped. So less people are actually having to pay fines and go to court or ending up in jail. Okay, on the next page, third page, we're talking about moving and non-moving violations. Now you have a chart in front of you. If you will, pull it up, take a look. These data right here took hours and hours to pull together. I'll show you how the spreadsheet worked in just a minute. But as you can see, we have new non-moving violations on the left side and moving violations on the right. And it turns out that black drivers, about 50% of their citations are for non-moving violations, such as the tag was expired, driver's license wasn't valid or not on you, you didn't have proof of insurance at the time of the stop, or you had a defect, cracked windshield, tail light out, something of that nature. So the piece of paper you have in your pocket, the officer wouldn't know at the time of the stop. So if you have a pretext stop, it says, well, I think something's going on here, I'm gonna pull you over. Or if you say, well, it looks to me like your tag's expired, I'm gonna pull you over. What's that have to do with safe driving? Okay, that's a concern, isn't it? Why are we stopping people for non-moving violations when in fact they should be able to go from point A to point B without being pulled over? And 50% of the citations for black drivers were in fact for non-moving offenses. Now, you look at the right-hand side, the moving violations, there you'll notice that white drivers are actually more likely to speed, more likely to run a stop sign, more likely to be in an accident, and have not put on their turn signal. So you ask the question, why? Why is this happening in Wichita, Kansas? I don't have an answer. Maybe you do. Maybe you can figure it out. But among us as citizens, we need to keep asking that question, don't we? Now, the next thing I want to look at is the stated purpose. Why do we have traffic tickets to start with? It turns out there's almost 150 to 200 different citations that can be issued by an officer. And I look at some of those, I wonder, why is it in law that an officer can pull someone over for those kinds of behaviors? I mean, it's not having much to do with your ability to drive, and yet you get a citation. And by the way, it's another $100 or more in court costs every time you get a citation. So you get the fine plus the court costs. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about the consequences of that in terms of suspension of driver's license and how that impacts people here in this city. But the total number of accidents, in fact, in this analysis showed that we have black drivers approximately the same number of accidents as white drivers. We don't know about the severity of those accidents, but we do know that black drivers are about as careful drivers as whites, but yet they're still receiving twice as many citations. So if the purpose is to say, well, we're issuing citations because we want to teach people how to drive safely, it isn't working. Doesn't much correlate at all, does it? So that's a very important consideration that I think we need to take into account. The next page here is talking about the frequency and location of accidents. One of the things we found is that there are about 20 intersections in this city where most of the accidents occur. Now, you'll see under the bullet point number 2 here, it's talking about Grove and Kellogg. Remember that big construction project? It seems like Kellogg's always under construction, right? They can't ever finish it. Sure enough, the majority of the accidents in 2016, 17, and 18 were at that intersection. Hundreds of them. As people were trying to figure out how to turn, whose turn is it next? Do I go now or is somebody else going to go? And bang, somebody gets whacked. Same thing happened at 21st and Amity Street, 25th, excuse me. That intersection had a light and a big utility pole right in the middle of the intersection. And for years, I see a nod, Sharon knows about it, right? Almost every week, somebody's getting whacked. A T-bone, a T-bone, a T-bone. Somebody trying to turn, somebody's trying to turn, and nobody knows whose turn it is. Finally, they put in a turn signal. Finally, there's enough time to clear that intersection before the next group of folks start driving. So isn't that nice? If we change the engineering of our intersections, we actually reduce the number of accidents. There's a higher correlation there than by saying, well, if we give more tickets, somehow people will learn and they'll shape up and we'll not have accidents. You follow me? Okay. So the bottom line is, as that page says, the facts are clear. Issuing more tickets does not prevent accidents. So let's take a look here. there's an independent analysis and a management tool. We have a number of things. This is the statute that our Chair Sheila Officer was talking about. It's KSA 22-4606. So if you want to go on the state legislature's website, you can see that statute, and you'll notice that it went and it got modified. By the way, your board was established under 22-4611B. That's where you come in. And that was done on the idea of data collection. Do we do data collection, or do we have advisory board? And some of the folks said, well, gee, we don't want to have to do any more data collection, so why don't you guys go ahead and form a review board? Okay. We need to do both. We need you folks, we need our board, and we need data analysis. We'll come to that in just a little bit. But the point is, you can't manage what you can't measure. If you don't look at the data, if you don't see what's going on your streets, you'll never know really what is going on and how this is impacting your citizens. So it becomes a management tool. Data analysis, like we're showing today, is a way to make sure that we have equal justice in our city of Wichita. Now, later in this presentation, we're going to ask for a motion from this particular board to the Wichita Police Department. I'm glad our chief is here, because we really want to make sure that what we did for 2016, 17, and 18 is followed up with an analysis for 19 and 20. It's easy. I'll be glad to share with the data analysts. There are at least 5 of them, I think, employed by the city of Wichita already. They're up here on the 4th floor or 5th floor, Chief? 5th floor, 6th floor? Wherever they are, they're already on staff. I don't have to be involved. Dr. Berza doesn't have to be involved. You get the data. All of us have a chance to have transparency. We get to see how we're moving forward. And the chief's trying to make some major changes. He's trying to help our officers de-escalate. That's an important word, isn't it? De-escalate. He's trying to help the officers train and become more civil. When they're in front of somebody, don't chest up to them. Don't make them feel like they're intimidated. Stand back enough, give some space, talk to them like a person, and let's have a conversation, see what we can do to help you today. Now that takes some time for some of the officers to learn. But we're going to see results if that happens. And we like to be able to document those results in this type of analysis. So you see here on the second point, it says in 2019, we've got these citations. We're suggesting that on the tickets, that it have Hispanic separate from Caucasian. Right now, Hispanic and Caucasian are linked together, so we really don't know the impact on the Hispanic community of the number of citations. They're all lumped together. We have another opportunity to have the nearest cross street. It's number 4. So if you're looking at accident patterns, you can actually see where they're occurring. Now, we have addresses in the data we got, but we don't have a cross street, so it's very difficult sometimes to match them up. Now, the important thing is here, it can go to the bureau captains. We have Captain Nicholson here. He can use this data. We've talked together. Your captain is a great person. I've had a lot of respect for this gentleman. Same way for Lem Moore. When he was at Captain North, at Bureau North, he and I sat down and went over the data for his particular bureau for 2019. And he found it very helpful. There are a lot of things that came out of that discussion. We have additional information. You see a phone number here. You see an email address. You'll see here that we've got a website. And a lot of this data is on that website. It's available to the public. We share it openly. We've shared it with you today. We'll continue to do that. And we look forward to that opportunity to do on a regular basis more cooperation. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about while we're together is the data we got in 2019 from the State Department of Revenue. This sheet you have in front of you here is talking about the number of folks who've had their driver's license suspended. Now, that happens many times in this state and across the nation because the courts say, well, we want our fines, and where's our court costs? And if you don't pay them within 30 days, we want to take your license away. And sure enough, once that happens, you're under house arrest. Legally, you can't drive anywhere. If you are, you're stopped. It's a $100 fine and 5 days in jail the first time. The third time, it's $1,500 fine and 90 days in jail. Just because you didn't pay your fine on time, now you're sitting in jail until you come up with more money. How are you going to come up with the money for the first fine, let alone $1,500? Another $1,500 the fourth time, or the fifth, or the sixth, or seventh. Some of these folks have been pulled over so many times they've owed $20,000 to $30,000. And they're expected to somehow pay it back and then get their license. How do they get to work? How do you keep your family paid? The good news is today, the Senate Transportation Committee in Topeka took the amendment that we've drafted and worked together with a coalition of people all across the state to say enough. Let's make sure we give folks a chance to have their original fine paid, do it under payment plan if need be, and community service, but give them a chance to have a restricted license in the meantime so they can drive on our streets legally, keep that job, pay their fines, take care of their families. That amendment passed today out of the Senate Transportation Committee. Thank you. Yes, yeah. We started that journey in 2012. We've been there year after year after year, and almost every time the courts would come up and testify, oh, that's our money, we got to have that reinstatement fee, we can't have those fines have to be paid, we got to hold those people accountable. For what? The original stop many times is a pretext stop. You don't know where a person has a license on them or not when you're driving down the street, do you? You don't know if they have insurance or not. Unless you know, as you've stopped them before and they didn't have it then, now you can stop them again and again and again. And they're so deep in debt, there's no way they could ever get out of it. So that particular bill allows folks to say, all right, we're going to take the warrant away for not appearing in court. If you don't show up in court within that 30 days to work out some arrangement, they take your license away and you have a warrant for your arrest. So in that particular amendment, it allows the judges to remove the warrant and let you come in and start talking civilly with each other about how we're going to get paid. Okay. The other thing it does is expunge the records. So if you've been driving on suspended, the Department of Revenue can't just keep saying, well, you drove on suspended, so we're not going to give your license back ever. People could pay those thousands of dollars. If they drove on suspended, they still wouldn't get a license. And the third thing that happens, if you have been stopped repeatedly, let's say 3 times in 5 years, you're called a habitual violator. Now, gosh, you pay your fines, you can't get your license back for another 3 years after you pay your fines. It's a no-win situation. So there was over 240,000 Kansans who do not have a license to drive and are in this predicament. The next thing I wanted to show you is that you've got a page that shows the number of folks in Wichita, Kansas. We want to bring it home to you. It's about 54,000 people right here in Wichita, in Sedgwick County, that do not have a valid license. And every time they're pulled over, it's the same situation I've already described. So this is a problem as a group all across the state. There have been, I don't know, I can name about 5 or 6 different organizations all come together and say, enough, let's stop this. It's already passed in 13 other states. There is a federal statute that's coming down from the federal government that says, if you don't stop this, if you don't stop taking licenses away, you're gonna lose transportation money. We're gonna take your funding away to build more highways and bridges. So there's money consequences for the cities and the states that are trying to take money from poor folks and say, all right, if you don't pay us more money, we're going to take your license. Well, that's kind of extortion, isn't it? That's the way of saying it simply. Now, the thing we have done as an advisory board, we held a town hall meeting on the 18th of June. And you're going to find a document that looks like this. It has a bunch of lines, has 23 priorities for reform in this Wichita area. These are recommendations we've offered to the chief and to the command staff. We've talked to the mayor, we've talked to some of the city council people. We want you to bring it up as well. These are rank ordered. These are rank ordered suggestions from over 100 citizens that came to that town hall meeting over at Urban Prep Academy in June of 18, June 18th of 2019. Excuse me, 2020, that was the year, wasn't it? Point is that this isn't rocket science. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is what the citizens that came then and from other parts of the country have said we need to do to make a difference in this world. These are some things that together, your group, our group, any other people, the ministerial league, there are all kinds of folks trying to say, enough. Let's start dealing with racial justice and not just say, well, that's somebody else's problem. You have to pay your fines. We're going to put you in jail till you come up with some more money. This doesn't work that way. If we make some changes in policy, if we make some changes in procedures, we have a way for those things to work. Now, I started out with the idea of accountability. You have the police contract right here, FOP contract, Fraternal Order of Police. This document, Article 13 and 14, deals specifically with the discipline and the termination of an officer. But all over this country, these FOP contracts make it almost impossible for the command staff, like our captain here, the police chief, the city manager, to remove or discipline almost any officer. If you have, in fact, a lawsuit brought against the officer for excessive use of force, the Karis Randolph case where a man was shot in front of 19 of his family members, he was having a PTSD attack, on 4th of July, he's hearing all his firecrackers going off, he's just freaking out. Instead of ComCare coming, which the parents and the mother asked for, 2 officers show up. The officer chests up to this man in his front yard, and he said, well, you're coming too close. He pulls his gun out and shoots him right there. Now he had a knife in his hand, he's just waving around, he was hysterical. He didn't know what was going on in the world. He wasn't threatening the officer or the people, he was afraid he was back in Iraq. That man was shot dead right in his front yard with his family. That case has gone all the way to the state Supreme Court. It's come back to the city and said, you better litigate this. This is a case you've got to deal with. You can't ignore this one. There's 52 cases, and Jennifer's not here now. She and I have been talking about this for months. For 7 months, we've been trying to get the information from the court. How much are you paying to defend these officers? It's up to $10 million, folks. At least $10 million since 2003 has been spent to either settle cases or pay defense attorneys for excessive use of force or charges of, I call it murder, I'm sorry. Maybe I just used the wrong word. But if you shoot somebody in cold blood, if I was a citizen or you as a citizen did that, it would be called murder, okay? But this FOP contract, 13 and 14 of the articles, those contracts make it extremely difficult for any officer to have any discipline or termination. Please read it. Please think about it, because this contract comes up for renewal at the end of December. We're hoping to work with FOP and the police department and the city council to make sure that that gets taken care of. And that we have either those 2 articles removed, or we have an opportunity for people to actually say, all right, what modifications are we going to make this happen so that officers are accountable. Now, you remember I started my conversation with the word accountability, right? That's what all this is about. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. That's why our advisory board, our racial profiling advisory board, we're all trying to just say, let's work with our police officers. Let's rebuild the trust. Let's rebuild the communication. Let's give an opportunity for people to work together with respect for each other, rather than chesting up, putting people in handcuffs, or give them a big fine they have to pay. Now, I'm going to stop at this point and make sure that you are aware of at least 1 or 2 more documents, and then I want to take time for questions, because I'm sure you may have some. You're going to find an executive summary of the report I just gave you. An executive summary, it's one page, not hard to read. Please do so. The other document, it says, why stop racial profiling in Wichita, Kansas? This is a very important part of what it is you folks hopefully will be able to do, is to say to yourselves, okay, what do we do to work together with the police department? The questions you asked, Pastor Sims, the question you asked was a very important one. If there's a complaint made, do you actually talk to the person that filed the complaint? Do you bring in the witnesses and get their side of the story, or just take the officer's point of view? There's over 800 complaints that have been made against Wichita Police Department, and they've been documented and sent to the folks up in Topeka, Kansas. It's called the Attorney General of the state of Kansas. They have it on their website. You can download it. 800 complaints, not one has been sustained for the citizen for racial profiling. Not one. That's just from this city. There's, of course, reports and complaints from all over the state. It's the same pattern. Officers did the right thing, no problem. Citizen, sorry, your complaint is not sustained. Something's wrong with there. It's a broken system. In fact, in the law itself that we had passed in 2005, it had a section 4608. Then, in fact, as an attorney, Jay, you'll get the understanding of this, it told the judge what it meant if you were convicted of racial profiling. It's a crime. 22 section in state statutes is criminal statutes, right? So here, 4608, several years later, the lobbyists for the sheriff department and the police departments got in touch with some of the senators and legislative chairs. They said, well, we need to take that out of there. So right now, even if you are convicted of racial profiling, there's nothing in statute that says, all right, this is the crime, this is the punishment. For you and I, they keep adding more and more and more infractions. They did it today. I was listening online to the state legislature. They're coming up with more infractions that people can be cited for. But for an officer, if you racial profiling somebody, you're scot-free. It's not even in the statute anymore. Now, data collection is something that we're doing all over this country, by the way. It's been going on in many states since the year 2000, 2001. Every stop in Texas and Illinois and Missouri and Colorado, all the states around us do data collection. Only Kansas hasn't been doing it. So we have in front of you a motion that I would like to at least mention, and the chair can bring it up later. It's this page right here. Hopefully you have it in front of you. And it's asking this board to join us and others and request that data from 2019 and 2020 be analyzed. Remember, all we had was data from 16 through 18, right? So let's catch up. Let's see how much progress has been made in the last 2 years. We can use the same procedures. I'll be glad to show it to the data analysts how we did this analysis. It's very simple. We used a lot of pivot tables, a lot of opportunity to dig down through Excel files, and then summarize the data in the charts I've shown you today. But if this board will go ahead and join us and others, you make the request, I think there's a good chance the chief and the others will say, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Once you've got this data analysis done for 19 and 20, the next thing to do is make sure it's done quarterly. Again, you can't manage what you can't measure. So as the data comes back to you at your quarterly meetings, it's posted on the website for Wichita government, wichita.gov. The citizens can see we're making progress. It's an attaboy. It's something we should all be proud of as a city, that we are now not disproportionately enforcing the laws on our streets of Wichita. Who has a question? Yes, sir.
Well, how is it that you were able to get the data from 2016 to 2018? What compels
I'm sorry, I
that?
can't hear you, sir.
Okay, I'm saying, how is it that you were able to get the data from 2016 to 2018? What is it that compelled that data to be released, and how come that's not still in effect?
I want to just say trust. When you talk with somebody in civil tones, The chief said fine. The city attorney said fine. The chief judge of this municipal court said, we have these data, we'll provide it to you, Dr. Chappell. And they did so willingly, and we thank them for that.
But there
We
was
had to
no,
build trust to start with.
There
And
was
hopefully
no-
they understood that we were not going to abuse the data, we were not going to misrepresent it. We'll do an accurate job and report it.
but there's nothing in place from the state level or city level that compels that data to be provided?
No, sir. It was in the original bill. It took 5 years for the governor's task force on racial profiling, after that was passed. They had till November of 2015, Pastor, to come up with a plan on how they're going to collect the data and how they're going to analyze it. That was in 2015. They went through $1 million of grant money, and after 5 years could never decide how they were going to do it. So we've done it here in Wichita again in 2001, and 2004, and then 2012, 13, and 14, and now 2016, 17, and 18, by working in a congenial way with city staff. And we thank them for that. They've been very generous. Next question.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm sorry I don't have that in front of me. I got here late. I've got it at home. When you said that more blacks were stopped, was that in any section of the city, or was that all over the city? In other words, depends on where you're driving, or does it matter? You can drive anywhere. You can be driving in Vic Ridge, for that matter. Was there anything that had to do with the parts of the city that gave you those numbers?
Sharon, thank you so much for bringing that question forward. We have something going on in this city that just bugs the heck out of me. I don't know, maybe you'll see this pattern in practice. We have some very small beats. You know what the beat is, right? We've got, 48 of them in the city of Wichita. Now, some of those beats are just a few blocks wide, 10, 20 blocks wide. Beat 44, for example. You have officers running up and down those streets all the time. You've got stop signs at almost every intersection in a residential neighborhood. So if you don't stop long enough, I got you, man, I got you. See? If you come out of that driveway, and I know you didn't have insurance last time I stopped you, you probably don't have it now because you didn't pay your court fine. Oh, by the way, you may have a suspended license. He gets pulled over again. Piling infraction on top of infraction, citation, more money to pay, and you never get out of that trap. Now, here's the data from Dr. Berzer. I made sure I was thinking ahead that you might be asking this question. Look at this data up here. You're going to see there are 4 zip codes on the east side of Wichita where blacks are disproportionately receiving citations. Here's this zip code 211. They had 19.5% of the stops. They're only at 10% of the population in that zip code. And you have 218, you 208, 220. 220, look at this, 27.5% of the stops and 21% of the population. Now we have one officer, he was under a STEP grant. Now this STEP grant is something they were supposed to be looking at seat belt violations and no infant carriers for the kids. Paid through the federal government, through the Department of Transportation in Topeka, came to Wichita, Kansas. We've had it for 3 years. One officer in 9 months wrote 729 tickets at one location. He parked himself at the 4500 block on East 13th at the bottom of a hill. So the speed limit is 35 miles an hour. If you don't slow down, don't put your brakes on, you're probably going to go 40, 45 maybe. Who knows? But almost every single one of those tickets, 729 tickets, from one officer. The average is only about 30 or 40 per year for an officer. And those are generally ones that are on patrol for traffic. But my God, we've got some anomalies that just, when you look at the data, you start seeing these things pop out at you. Say, okay, What is this? Dr. Berger found this. He also found if you didn't have an infant seat in your car, a black mama or papa is 24 times more likely to get a ticket for that offense. They're 8 times, not percent, but 8 times more likely to be cited with open container as opposed to a white driver. So these disproportionate things start popping out from the data Dr. Berger looked at, the data I looked at. It's clear we have disproportionate enforcement of our laws by some officers, not all, but some are totally off the range or the range, or whatever you want to talk about, right? Who's got the next question?
I just want to get some clarification.
Go ahead, Jaime.
You mentioned earlier that Hispanics aren't categorized or part of the citation options. And so does that skew some of your data? Because I know for a fact when I've been stopped, not that it's often, but I have been, I've been put down as a white person.
Absolutely.
And I also know that folks that I relate to that have darker skin are related as black. So how does that skew your data in terms of that?
Big time. It's a big problem, and it can be solved by putting a checkbox on the ticket. The ticket we received, I'm going to show you how this data looks just very quickly. Let me get over here where I can spot. Trying to get the trifocals to work. Any of you guys wear trifocals? Okay, this is how the data came. Case number, ticket, date. You see all the headings up here? Here's race, so you can sort by race. You can sort by yes or no. Did they have an accident? Yes or no. Do you have an injury? Yes or no. But in terms of race, Jaime, Hispanics are lumped together with whites. That can change in an instant. All we have to do, we got electronic tickets, I think, coming, if I'm not mistaken, for the city. Put in Hispanic and whites separate. Yes, sir.
Well, but it has ethnicity, so why would you need to have that under race if it's listed under ethnicity? Since Latino or Hispanic is a ethnicity, not a race.
Well, that's a good question, but it doesn't get reported very often. They don't ask, they just assume, all right, you're white, you're Hispanic, they don't have a check mark, so it goes in there in that case. Now let me show you the rest how this data came to us. We're very pleased the way they provided it. If you don't have enough of the data, you can't do the pivot tables and can't analyze it. Look here, you got the age of the driver, you have the sex of the driver, you have the officer's name, you have their badge number, you have the location of the stop. You see that? You see the beat number? Okay, so these beats we're talking about, not only zip code, but you can break it down by beat. You can say, all right, where are these stops taking place? You have the zip code. That's how the zip code analysis was done by Dr. Berger. When the city provided the information, they were up front, and I thank them for that. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you very much for making sure we got complete use of the data. And the only thing they scrubbed out of it was the defendant's name. Now, we need that because we don't know how many of these folks were just stopped repeatedly. Every time you pull out of a driveway, oh, I got you again. I got you. I got you. Those gotcha tickets have very little to do with safe driving, don't they? That means, well, we got a cash register, just keep ringing more money, more money. Here we got again, another fine, another court cost. Now, we got the model, the number, we got the vehicle, we got style, color, all this good stuff, but the point is, once you have that data, you can start analyzing it now a whole variety of ways. Yes, sir?
Under ethnicity, what does the H mean? What does the N mean?
Let me see if I can pull down enough of that. It was never clear to us what that meant. And let me see if we can.
Be Hispanic and Hispanic.
All right, we got an H. We got a Hispanic guy right here. H, I assume, is Hispanic, okay?
Yeah.
And we got some more H's down here. I don't know if that's as accurate as putting it on the ticket as Hispanic. Here's one of the things that Jaime knows about, and I'm pleased that you're here. We've talked before. You have Hispanic drivers in this town that have come in with a Mexican driver's license. Now that's recognized in Mexico. In other countries, you can drive on a license from the United States. You know, if I go to England, I can drive. I don't have to have an England. My point is that officers had been, not under the new chief, not under Gordon Ramsay, but under a previous chief, We'd had reports of those licenses being torn up, or somebody would have a green card and they say, oh, that's fake, and they tear it up right there in front of them. Now, what are you gonna do? You can't talk back to the officer, you don't wanna get arrested. We had a lady that was taking videotape complaints from Hispanics. She was on our board. I'm not gonna name her name because I don't want her to get any more harassment. She had a file folder this thick of complaints. She had videotapes across the top of the file cabinet of all these video interviews in Spanish. How many knows who I'm talking about? All right. Her office was broken into. They cut the lock. The only thing in her office that was taken was that file folder and those videotapes. Everything else, all of her computers, all of her business files, nothing was touched. It wasn't ransacked, nothing. The only two things missing from her office after that break-in, which, by the way, happened after the fire at Treatco. The police department and the fire department shut down Treatco. They couldn't go in, supposedly left that vacant. And then somebody, don't know for sure who it was, but who would have the desire to go in and take all those complaints and all those videotapes and leave nothing behind.
Well, how long ago was that?
I think it was 2007, 2008. I've got all the detail. I can tell you more specifically.
The reason I'm asking is, you know, you gave a couple examples that I don't think would go unchallenged, like the tearing up of the green card or the Mexican license, because now the officer is going to have his acts on video on.
Thank you.
And that would be very well documented, and that would be a violation of departmental policy
Correct.
that I suspect would end up in either a suspension or a termination. So, I mean, those kinds of issues are capable of being addressed now.
I thank you for bringing it up, Chairman. I'm not complaining at all that that's happening under Chief Ramsey. I'm not expecting that to be the case for officers under Captain Nicholson. I don't think they would tolerate it for a second. But without having this information on the ticket of who's Hispanic and who's white and who's not, that's a simple fix. And also putting that intersection cross street down on a ticket. You know, you can put down the location of the accident. It's already in the data. Just put another data element, and that'll be there. Who else has another question? These are good questions. Yes, sir.
My only question is, if the ethnicity is Hispanic, then why would the race be white?
I don't know.
Because Hispanics.
I have no idea how that happened.
It is, but that's the race. If you're
Yeah,
if you're
considered
Latino,
Caucasian.
you're white. I mean,
That's right.
like race. There's only like a couple of, like, scientifically they categorize it like just, you know, for maybe, I don't know, less than 5 different types of races. So you fall under like Caucasoid, Negroid, or white.
There's a difference.
Dr. Chappell has a proposed resolution here, and we're pushing our time on it now. Specifically, you want us to make the request for the data that's contained in this proposed resolution.
Yes, please. You have assumed through the way in which the law was changed, the role that we had as our racial profiling board. We've been able to continue that relationship with the chief, and we appreciate that, and with the city attorney. I would make the request again, but you can't. You have more authority than we do at this point. If you do and they comply, I think it'll be a blessing for all of us. I want to get out of this business. I don't need to be standing here.
Sure, and I
You can
think,
have Captain Nicholson make these reports.
I mean, you've identified many different subject matters that are very complex, but this is a fairly straightforward one here, the data collection request. What I would like to do is hold this as a resolution to be considered at our next meeting, have the department simply appear at that meeting and let us know the mechanics of doing that, so that we'll know what those mechanics are, and then the board can consider it. Does that make sense?
Yes. My question on this, and maybe you can't answer it, maybe somebody can, is I'm not against it, but there's surely, this is added work. So is this an added cost? Is this it sounds real good, but all of you have worked, and you know how it is when somebody comes along and says, well, why don't you do this? And you say, well, I'm already working 40 hours a week. When would you like me to do it?
May I respond, Sharon, in
So
this way?
that's what I'm asking.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. I watched the videotape of one of your meetings several weeks ago. Oh, a month ago. You don't meet every week, you meet every month, excuse me. And you had almost an hour presentation from a guy talking about shell casings, remember? Shell casings and how they scientifically look at this and look at that and something else and something else. His job apparently is to look at shell casings. I don't know what else he does, but at least he was very thorough in looking at shell casings. They look at crime statistics all over every beat. You can go on the map for the Wichita Police Department and you can see the number of burglaries, larcenies, cars stolen. Somebody's analyzing that data already. They have 5 analysts paid already on staff. I can guarantee you what I can do is show these folks 1 or 2 at the most how this was done. It's not rocket science at all. I did not use any fancy statistics. No t-test, no chi-square, no regression analysis. It's simple taking pivot tables and Excel spreadsheets and boom, you start seeing a pattern.
And Walt,
Yes, sir.
if I can add, like I said, we do have five analysts. And as far as getting the ticket data, our analysts do send that out as far as the numbers, as far as broke down by officers and bureau. Obviously, that's gonna be something that you guys have to recommend. And we go to the chief, that would be another chart of some additional data that you guys can look at this month. So all it is working on a report that it's not actually generated. You won't actually have to have somebody that's actually pulling all the tickets out in the computer.
What I was thinking about doing was just holding this and having you folks come in next time and proposing what you just did, what you just said. If you think that this is not this is very easily done in the context of the way it's being requested, then we can just, if someone makes a motion, we can consider it now.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion on the proposed resolution? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? You have your resolution.
Hallelujah. My God, what a beautiful experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your very informative presentation. There's a lot here. We obviously are only going to deal with a small part of it today. We need to move on. The next item on the agenda is an executive session item related to case number 20 PSB 2781, which is a Wichita police officer's use of a taser to apprehend a suspect in a complaint that the force was unnecessary. In that context, I move that the Citizens Review Board recess into executive session for 30 minutes.
Lieutenant Henderson, how long do you think that would take? 15 minutes.
All right. 15 minutes is never enough. I'll say 20 minutes to receive information on case number 20 PSB 2781. This is for the purpose of addressing matters involving personnel matters of non-elected personnel, and to protect the privacy interests of individuals that may be identified. And the board will return in approximately 20 minutes, no earlier than 20 minutes from now. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will be in executive session, so the folks who aren't on the board have to leave. We're now back in public session. As to case number 20 PSB 2781, the board makes no recommendation. As a matter of new business, I understand Mr. Bender has a motion.
Yes, I have a motion that as the CRB, we issue a reminder to Professional Standards Bureau stressing the importance of following up on complaints with the complainant.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion?
Yes, discussion, I would just add to that, following up on complaint is in accord with WP policy number 901.
So noted.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we passed that motion. Denny has another point. He and Kevin Nicholson have been talking about some statistics and data. Do you want to raise that issue?
Just quickly, because we are approaching our normal allotted time, I've noticed that other communities are using 3 statistics and responding to some of the public's concern about use of force. So I asked Captain Nicholson, and he was very prompt and quick in his response for some statistics that I believe come out of Blue Team rather easily and don't require a great deal of research. But I asked him for the calls for service over a specific period, whether it was for a month or a quarter or annually. That's how many times the public is calling upon the police department for action. And then the number of arrests that result from those calls from service. And subsequently, how many of those involved the use of force. I know I was watching a video that the Petaluma Police Department uses those statistics in response to the public's concern about excessive force, and I thought it would be good for us to have a regular reporting on those. Of note, I was underestimating the number of times our community calls upon WPD. It was over 200,000 times last year. Sorry, my voice is failing me, but 201,000 times public called for service. And the use of force on a month-to-month basis last year was fairly consistent. There were no real anomalies in periods of the year, or it's ranged anywhere from 138 incidents to a low of 102 each month. So I think that presents, and my intent is to look for trends and changes in those statistics. So thank you for complying, and I present it to the board as to whether they want to continue to track that along with the complaints.
Captain, in that context, the use of force would mean any kind of use of force, correct?
Correct.
So that could be
So
physical
like
restraint or?
The show of force, actually using some sort of muscling or some hand-to-hand type of technique, so that's all inclusive. So.
Okay.
Aren't those items supposed to be tracked or reported by the officer anyway?
Correct. It's all entered into Blue Team.
All right.
So I would agree.
Absolutely.
So do you want an official motion made, Mr. Bender?
Well, it's the will of the board. If you want the PSB to reporting that on a monthly basis.
So you're asking for the calls for service and also the
Use of force.
Arrests and use of force.
Okay.
Is that something that's easily generated on a monthly basis? Would you like to do it on a quarterly basis? Is that how?
Keely can answer for me better than that.
She's shaking her head.
So I deal with Blue Team every single day. The way that Blue Team happens is if a show of force or use of force comes through from an officer after being dispatched out on a call, they do submit a entry within Blue Team. It's going to include all the citizen information, the officer information, what type of force was used or displayed. Then at that point, it does go to the supervisor, which is going to be their sergeant, and then works its way up to the chain of command, up to a lieutenant or a captain. Then at that point, it gets pulled into our database within IA Pro. So I did inform Captain Nicholson that it is possible to track. However, if you want monthly numbers, they're going to skew as time goes on, because everything that is out in Blue Team is considered zero data. It is not tracked within IA Pro, and that's how we pull it through. So previous years are going to be more consistent without the current year that you're currently in. Does that make sense? I can't pull an entry through unless it's been completely approved by a supervisor. Entries remain out in Blue Team until all information has gone through the chain of command. If there is something that is missing within an entry, it actually goes back out to the officer to be corrected. That way it is correct when we are collecting data at the end of the year. So all the numbers that you do have right now are going to be more accurate for 2020. That's not to say that numbers coming from December, November, and October might not increase, because entries that remain out in Blue Team are not part of those numbers. Currently, right now, I just did an audit not too long ago. I had 600 and some entries sitting out in Blue Team. So just keep that in mind.
So what kind of a time lag are we looking at for consistent and valid numbers for comparison? 3
Sure.
months? 6
So-
months?
Quarterly?
I could do it quarterly, I can, but I would recommend doing it quarterly by the previous quarter. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, I can, that's not a problem. So let's say
Keep it simple.
come the next quarter of this year, I would give you guys the first quarter for this year.
Right, that makes sense.
So that would be
Reasonable.
more accurate data. And then at the end of the year, come, let's say, January or February of 2022, I could give you more accurate numbers for 2021. And I can include that on the reports that I give you at the end of the year for your end of the year numbers. And if that's something you want to do, I'd be more than happy to.
Sounds good.
Any other questions?
That's good.
Okay.
Do we need that in the form of a motion, or is it just a
I
request?
think we can just do it.
Okay.
Get it done. Any other items of new business?
I want to make a motion that because we are an advisory board, that our recommendations that we put forth be formalized in a document that has date and description of that, of what that recommendation was and when it was made. Because at the end of our service, that's really all we're going to have as we look back, is those recommendations that we made as a board, because we don't really have any real authority. And so that would be my motion, that those recommendations be formalized. I know they're in the minutes and all of that, but instead of having to look through all that, that there would be one document prepared with, again, date and description of the recommendations that we made as a board. And I see Jennifer looking at Jay real hard.
No, we can do that. I mean, and we have done that occasionally in the past, where we've actually adopted very formal language. Usually it gets put in the minutes that says we adopted this language.
Exactly.
And are you asking that it be put on a separate piece of paper?
Yes, that it's formalized in one-page document or whatever is necessary, that we can easily get a hold of, instead of digging through all the minutes that says, here were the recommendations by the city
running list.
of Wichita, right?
A running list of any recommendations that we make.
Exactly.
Or like it wouldn't hurt.
I mean, it could be done as part of the minute process. It could just be appended to the back of the minute, I think. I would encourage those, then, when you make a motion, that you think about the wording of the motion so that it can be stated with specificity on the record, so that our minute keeper can get it down in a way that we understand.
And I think of being real specific, that our recommendations be captured in a formalized document with date and time. Yeah, so I think we've met that requirement. But again, when a motion is made, there is a time of discussion anyway, and that's when clarity can be brought to it if there's any confusion.
Was that a motion?
Yes, I've made a motion. Is there a second?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, passed. I urge the board then to be cognizant of that requirement, because the way best to do it is to make sure you write out or have very clear language so that we can then draft that. Because otherwise, you'll try to figure it out later, and your record won't be as clear. So, and it's important, I mean, if we are very specific in the language we use to make a motion, that can be captured in the minutes and then simply extracted easily, and that would be the best way to do it.
And again, there's a discussion period on every motion before it's actually voted on. And that's when, if there is ambiguity or confusion, it can be worked out and the language specified.
All right, let's talk about the last item. The next meeting would normally be on March 25. Is that date okay? If there's any conflicts, let me know. Otherwise, that's when it'll be. March 25? We good to go? All right.
Were there any cases anybody want to review?
Are there any more cases? I didn't have any this time.
I seen a couple that I might want to look at, 20 PSB 5178, 20 PSB 3483. I don't see those.
What was that first one, I'm sorry?
5178.
5178, PSB, 20 PSB 5178,
Okay.
PSB or 20 PSB 3483.
Any other items? Is there a motion to adjourn?
As so moved.
Thank you.
Second?
Right away.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
I gotta go see my wife.